for our recording.
Okay. So I think the issue of illicit is quite important because again, as this government, we cannot ignore it because it undermines what we intend to do around public health, but also just reducing consumption of alcohol beverages because again, that also speaks to the negative social economic costs that comes with alcohol consumption. So we are always engaging with the Revenue Authority, which is SARS, and you would have noted that in the previous budget, the minister has also made further allocations or additional resource allocations to SARS to try to strengthen their enforcement capacity. But it's not only the issue for SARS. I think the government has taken an approach, and you would have noted that in the president's address when he talked about having a program that will be directed from the presidency around dealing with illicit trade in the economy generally. That will also include the excisable products like alcoholic beverages, tobacco, and other sectors that seeks to undermine the broader objectives of government from an economic development perspective, and also specifically for this issue to deal with the public health perspective and the social negative harms that comes from alcohol consumption. So government is quite serious about dealing with all of these things. So we are always engaging with SARS to look at how we can strengthen enforcement. And with the workshop that is coming, we also want to benefit from the inputs from stakeholders that can, assist in terms of the elements that we should be looking at in terms of incorporating in these programs around strengthening enforcement. Because otherwise, you are correct. If we don't deal with illicit, basically it will undermine everything that we are trying to do.
Please take.
Oh, sorry. I also just have and I'm purely thinking from some readers' perspective. I think many will actually, in principle, agree, the harm and the social externalities that it causes and that type of thing. But some others will probably just ask how concerned or at least how seriously does the Treasury and probably the government as well just consider some unintended consequences if you don't get this regime right, in terms of, yes, you probably reach a point where you do get an excise system that works in lowering the consumption of alcohol, but then you have producers that are starting to say that their volumes go down and their economic activity goes down, and they start actually scaling down, and you basically contribute to the unemployment rate. And I think that's one of the what more economically inclined people want to wonder, is that are you not replacing one social issue with then another one?
I mean, this is an important issue that we are raising, and if you look at the for example, what you are proposing around reformulation of the products, for, let's say, for example, for beer, is that the issue for us is that we must reduce absolute alcohol consumption. So the proposal is to then look at how does the tax system encourage or incentivize lower alcohol or the move towards lower alcohol content products. Because again, if, for example, you have lower alcohol content products, but still sort of like maintain the overall volume, but then the alcohol content, because that's what is contributing to the harm. That's what we want to see. But also, and I think that's quite important because the industry will talk about wanting to grow and contribute towards jobs and all of that. But for us, it becomes quite important is that what kind of growth are we talking about? Because we cannot talk about growth that also contributes to more social ills. You take it even from the environment side, with regards to some of the instruments that we have looked at to say, yes, we need to develop, but we cannot develop in such a way that we also cause harm to everybody play their role in terms of dealing with this issue.
Okay. Thank you very much. There's somebody next to me who's just itching to say something. So I'm going to allow you just 2 minutes.
I think that the important question that you're asking is that we need to reframe this issue around illicit, because it's not just about illicit production, it's also illicit trade. And we've got a problem in South Africa where the majority of outlets in townships are illegal. So it's illicit. And so there's an enforcement issue. But with that is the supply chain is who is supplying the unlicensed illegal sector. And if we look at what we have in South Africa, is we've got provinces and municipalities providing licenses in townships and not in suburbs, right? So that's one problem. There's the issue around density. There's no consideration for the number of people in the township versus the number of licenses that is being issued. Then on top of it is you've got SAB tracking in the products to the licensed outlets that finds its way to the unlicensed outlets. So there's a supply chain issue. And part of what Paul was saying is that there needs to be complementary interventions. So do we have a track and trace system? So at the place of production, are we monitoring where that is being distributed and therefore where it's being sold? So that we can understand why is it that more than 60% of trade retail in South Africa in townships is illegal. It's unlicensed. It's part of the illicit sector. So when we're talking about illicit, we need to broaden it beyond production. It needs to include trade, and the enforcement should not just be about production. It should be about where trade is happening and where people are living, because that is where we are seeing the harm. And Kashifa is going to talk about the issues around harm. We've just done a study on GBV and alcohol availability, and I mean, we can talk about it, but the very notion of alcohol being traded where people live is problematic. And so there's many questions that we need to bring into the equation so that when we look at harm, that we address it from different perspectives, complementary, and not just depend on tax.
Thank you very much for taking 3 of my 2 minutes that I had given. Kone, are you still online? Kone?
I am.
Oh, great.
And let me just
Okay.
show myself.
Thank you very much.
Can you see me? Can I share my presentation?
Yes, please share your presentation. It says currently you are not sharing your video. So let me.
It's just a delay on this.
Oh, it's a delay. Okay. And I'm handing over to you now.
Can I just confirm that you can see it?
We can see you.
Yes, we can see it.
It's not in presentation mode yet, is it?
We can see your beautiful face.
Okay, that's great.
Okay, now we can see it.
Are you now seeing my face and my presentation, or just my
Yes,
presentation?
now we're seeing both.
Okay, great. So I'm sitting far away from you, and sadly I can't see what's happening. The only thing that I'm seeing right now is my presentation, but I would like to talk to the situation regarding illicit trade and excise taxes. It comes up a lot in all discussions with Treasury. Sitting far away from you, and sadly I can't see what's happening. The only thing that I'm seeing right now is my presentation, but I would like to talk to can I just ask that something is happening, because I'm getting a lot of feedback. Discussions with Treasury, and sadly I can't see what's happening. The only thing that I'm seeing right now is Onsebo. Yeah, it sounds as though it's getting better. Okay, can I just confirm? Are you hearing me now? Hello, Onsebo, are you hearing me? I'm not sure if you are hearing me. I'm going to stop sharing. Can I just confirm that you were hearing me previously, because I was getting a lot of feedback from myself. Hello?
Hi, Corne, it's Kash. We can
Yes.
hear you. It's just that because of the live stream, there is about a 10 to 15-second delay. So I would suggest that you continue with the presentation, and then we go from there. He'll hear.
Okay, but I just don't want to hear myself because it's very off-putting. Okay, I'm sharing again. So if I can just get some feedback from anybody to just tell me that they are hearing me. I'm not hearing anything, so I'm not sure if you're hearing me. To just tell me that they are hearing me.
We're hearing you and we're seeing your slides.
Okay, great. Yeah, and can I please, I hope that I will not get feedback from myself. So thank you very much for the opportunity to be able to talk specifically regarding excise taxes and illicit trade focused on the alcohol industry. So just as a declaration of interests, I am the director of the research unit on the economics of excisable products. We are a UCT accredited research unit. We are funded by a number of different organizations, the Gates Foundation, Cancer Research UK, Vital Strategies, and other organizations that aim to promote public health. And we have not and we will not ever accept funding from the producers of any of the products that we have investigated over time. So our main message today is that in mature markets like tobacco, like alcohol, an increase in illicit trade is usually and would be expected to be accompanied by a decrease in legal consumption. I'm going to talk in some detail about the situation regarding the tobacco illicit trade, and I'm going to provide some of the research that we have conducted in tobacco, and then I'm going to compare that with the situation regarding alcohol, and we will, I hope to demonstrate to you that there has been a no sharp increase in alcohol illicit trade since 2017, as has been pointed out by the industry. We strongly believe that the industry uses this argument to discourage the increase in excise taxes as is being proposed by the National Treasury. And we will conclude the presentation by indicating that the government must be vigilant about illicit trade. They must implement mechanisms to reduce illicit trade, both for tobacco and for alcohol, but it should not buy the industry's narrative that the illicit trade in alcohol is out of control. I just want to make it very clear at the outset. And that is when we talk about illicit trade in alcohol, we are not talking about illicit illicit shebeens and bars and so on selling illicit trade. When we talk about illicit trade, we are talking about the fact that the excise tax has not been paid. That's the definition of illicit trade in our environment. All right, so it's not a case that if a shebeen buys beer from a wholesaler and then sells it illicitly without a license, but the full tax has been paid. In our definition, that would still be legal trade, even though in the selling process, that is not going to be regarded as legal, as indicated by a dealer just previously. I also want to point out that we are not a sort of deniers of illicit trade. We have done a lot of research on illicit trade in cigarettes, and I want to show you this diagram over here that indicates what has happened to cigarette consumption between 2002 and 2022. That's when our research finished. We can be pretty sure, based on a trend extrapolation and on what we know has happened in terms of revenue, that the trend since 2022 has been very similar as what it was in the period between 2020 and 2022. And I want to spend a little bit of time talking about this. We know very clearly what legal consumption is of cigarettes for the simple reason that this is reported by the National Treasury on an annual basis. This is illustrated by the blue line over here. And what we are seeing is that from the period 2002 to about 2009, legal consumption was pretty much constant. It was actually increasing ever so slightly. And then subsequently, there was a huge decrease in legal consumption. The green line, the top line, indicates what has happened to total cigarette consumption. And we see that over this more or less 20-year period, initially total cigarette consumption was more or less flat. And over the past 10 or so years, we've seen that there's been a modest increase in total cigarette consumption from roughly 27 billion cigarettes to approximately 33 or 34 billion cigarettes. The difference between total consumption and legal consumption is illicit consumption. That's indicated by the red line. And this is a very disturbing line. And the reason it's a disturbing line is there's been a huge increase in illicit cigarette trade, especially from about 2010 onwards up to today. And it is, according to our estimates and also according to the industry estimates, the illicit market is in fact greater than the legal market of cigarettes even today. So currently, our best estimate is that the illicit market of cigarettes comprises about 60% of the market. What you notice is that an increase in the illicit consumption is associated with a decrease in legal consumption. Cigarettes, like alcohol, is a mature market. The products have been around forever, and the people that consume them don't change their habits overnight. So it's not a case that there are huge changes in aggregate consumption. Overall, there might be a small upward or downward trend, but generally speaking, consumption is relatively flat over time for the simple reason that this is a mature product with an established customer base. Now the question is, what caused the very significant increase in the illicit trade in cigarettes? The question would be, is it as a result of an increase in the excise tax? Well, let's have a look at the numbers. So as economists, we tend to look at real excise tax increases. What we mean by real is we remove the effect of inflation. So we take out the effect of inflation, and we see that over the period 1993, at the dawn of democracy, up to right now, there's been various stages and phases of how the excise tax has increased. From 1993 to 2002, we see that on an annual basis, the inflation-adjusted excise tax increased by 14% per year. Those were massive increases. From 2002 to 2010, we see that the excise taxes were increased by about 6.5% per year over that period. So up to 2010, we see that there's been very, very sharp increases in excise taxes. If we go back and we look at the red line on this diagram over here, we don't have the estimated illicit consumption before 2002, but there is nothing to indicate that illicit trade was an issue at that point in time. Up to 2009, illicit trade was well below 5%, well below 10% of the total market in South Africa, and we see that it was a bit of a non-issue. At the same time, this was associated by very significant increases in the excise tax. The point that I'm making is that an increase in the excise tax does not have to be associated with an increase in illicit trade. We haven't seen it in South Africa. So what happened since 2010? Well, since 2010, the excise taxes have increased at a very, very low rate. From 2010 to 2016, it increased by 1.7% per year on average in real terms. And from 2016 to 2026, it increased by less than 0.5% at 0.4% per year on average. And this was the period where where illicit trade was exploding. So it's very clear, based on this example of South Africa, that excise tax increases are not causing an increase in the illicit trade in cigarettes. So what did? And the answer is institutional factors. Unfortunately, as you all know, the period of state capture was associated also with the state capture of the revenue service. And in 2014, the special investigative units that were specifically focused on reducing the illicit trade in cigarettes and in tobacco products were closed down. This was described in detail by Johan van Lochrenberg in 2 books, Rogue and Tobacco Wars. And what we were seeing in that point in time, that there was this very significant increase in the illicit trade indicated by the red line between 2014 and 2018. In 2020, the government introduced a sales ban on all tobacco products. We were strongly against it. We did the research. We indicated that this is not the right way to go about it. And sadly, what happened was that the sales ban entrenched the illicit market completely, to the effect that more than 50% of total cigarettes sold in South Africa are sold as illicit cigarettes. And if one just goes around and onto the street and picks up cigarette packs, you will find that literally the majority of them are illicit brands with specific names attached to them that we've done the research on, indicating that they are illicit. The international evidence is that the key drivers of illicit trade are organized crime, corruption, weak enforcement, not high taxes. And that is exactly what we have seen in South Africa over the past 15 or 20 years. Since 2010, when illicit trade started increasing, was supercharged by the drama at the South African Revenue Services, and was further supercharged by the rather ill-conceived sales ban in 2020 as a result of the COVID epidemic. So if one has a look at illicit alcohol, the Drinks Federation of South Africa commissioned a report by Euromonitor, and the essence of Euromonitor's report is indicated in this very small diagram over here. And basically what it comes down to is, in 2017, the total market consisted of licit consumption and of illicit consumption. And then they did another exercise in 2024, and they said, here is licit consumption and illicit consumption. What we see is, if we have a look at the orange bars, that legal consumption between 2017 and 2024 increased substantially. But the gray bars indicate that, according to this report, the illicit consumption of alcohol increased from about 50 million hectoliters to 77 hectoliters, a 55% increase in illicit consumption. This is what the industry wants us to believe. And the essence of this report, it's more than 100 pages of this report, is summarized in this one statistic, and that is there's been a 55% increase in illicit trade in alcohol between 2017 and 2024. And you would have heard that 55% number talked about in numerous fora, also at the presentations to the National Treasury, as Mr. Legote has indicated to us. I want to investigate this in a little bit more detail. So essentially, I want to focus first on things that we can measure. The things that we can measure is licit consumption. And the way that we measure licit consumption is by looking at how much revenue the government gets, and we divide it by the amount of excise that they pay per liter of alcohol, and then one can work out what is the legal consumption of alcohol in a particular period. So, if we have a look at the orange bar specifically, from 2017 to 2024, aggregate consumption of tax-paid alcohol increased by 24.2%. That's the number that we are getting from the Euromonitor report that they in turn have received from, or calculated from, the statistics published by National Treasury every year in February at the reading of the budget. At the same time, in that period, the population aged 15 and more grew by 14.7% based on very well-established United Nations data, as indicated by my reference over there. So what that implies is that in terms of legal consumption, per capita consumption of tax-paid alcohol increased by 8.3%. And that is not quite, but essentially the difference between the 24% increase in aggregate consumption and the 15% increase in the population. So per capita consumption of legal alcohol increasing by 8%, that's quite impressive. Let's have a look at the environmental context. In what context did this increase in legal consumption take place? Well, the macroeconomic context was not great. Per capita GDP decreased by 4.7% over that 7-year period. It has not been a good economic period for South Africa. At the same time, if we look at something that we call disposable income per capita of households, what that essentially is how much money households have available. It's not just the total production of the people of South Africa, but the disposable income of households that decreased by 1.5%. Essentially, what that boils down to is we have become poorer over the past 7 years. Most people experience it like that, and the statistics also bear that out. At the same time, there's been a modest increase in the real excise tax on alcohol, anything between 10% and 13%, depending on the beverage. At the same time, the real price of alcohol has remained constant. In other words, it's not a case that suddenly prices have become much cheaper, and as a result of those cheaper prices, people have been able to buy much more alcohol. No, real prices of alcohol have remained roughly constant over that 7-year period. And at the same time, we see internationally, and to some extent in South Africa as well, consumption of alcohol has stabilized or decreased internationally. It's not a case that internationally there's been this huge increase in consumption, and that sort of, let's call it, international effect is driving consumption in South Africa. That is not the case. We see that the Generation Z and Generation Alpha is consuming much less alcohol than the older generations. The bottom line of all this is the following, and that is within a very difficult macroeconomic environment, the legal alcohol industry has performed extremely well. They have been able to increase the consumption of their products by 24% in aggregate, and in per capita terms of people of drinking age, they've increased it by about 8 or 9%. A very, very impressive performance by the legal alcohol industry producing these products. However, despite this very, very impressive performance by the legal industry, the alcohol industry claims that illicit sales have increased by an even greater percentage, i.e. by 55%. So let's look at the gray bars of the diagram that I'm repeating over here. And we see that illicit consumption has increased from roughly 50 million liters of alcohol, 50 million liters of alcohol equivalent to 77. That's a 55% increase. I'm astounded by that. And the reason that I'm astounded by that is the legal consumption has increased by very substantial amounts. And over and above that, there's also been a massive increase in the illicit alcohol. Now, the question is, where do these numbers come from? So these numbers come from a Euromonitor report. Euromonitor is a market research company. It is highly respected. We have got a subscription to them, and on certain things, they are really fantastic. However, on things that are hard to measure, it becomes very difficult to see where do they get the numbers from. And this particular Euromonitor report was commissioned by the Drinks Association of South Africa, an industry body that, of course, aims to promote the interests of the drinks industry. And the report was based on basically 4 different sources of information. And I've verbatimly copied from the report the different sources. So they're looking at their passport numbers. Passport is the document published by Euromonitor for a particular industry, where they're looking at press releases, official statistics, etc. They then looked at 57 different outlets, and they sort of ask the people at these outlets to tell about their perspectives on the supply of illicit alcohol. These are not scientific exercises. They are not quantitative exercises. They interviewed 12 stakeholders in the alcohol industry. All of them have got an interest in increasing alcohol consumption rather than reducing it. So there is an inherent bias over there. And they did an online survey about perceptions of just over 700 consumers of alcohol in South Africa, specifically with regard to their perceptions of illicit alcohol, where they believe these products are sold, and perceptions of alcohol actions, of government actions rather. None of these ways allow one to quantify the volume of illicit alcohol. At best, we can get an understanding of what we think it is, about some perceptions, etc. But it is impossible with this type of research to come up with a precise number. So, as I've indicated over there, none of these sources provide any indication of the size of the illicit alcohol market or the growth of the market. At best, they provide some industry perspective and some perceptions by the public. And we are of the opinion that that number of a 55% increase in illicit alcohol is not credible, simply because it is impossible with the methodology that Euromonitor used to come up with anything that is even close to 55%. So, I want to re-emphasize something before I finish off. Alcohol is not tobacco. If we have a look at per capita tax-paid consumption, this is tax-paid legal consumption of alcohol. What we are noticing is over time, total consumption of alcohol is more or less on an upward trend. Of course, there's the 2020 decrease. Everybody knows about that. That was driven by the sales bans of alcohol over an extended period during 2021 and the beginning of 2022. And what we notice is that alcohol consumption overall has increased after 2020, and it's sort of bounced around in the same way that alcohol consumption has bounced around between 2010 and 2020. There's nothing in this legal alcohol to suggest that there is this sudden decrease in legal consumption. Let's have a look at cigarettes. Cigarettes are shown on the secondary vertical axis, the one on the right-hand side, and it's indicated by the gray line, not by the bars. And what we are noticing is that over time, legal cigarette consumption has decreased dramatically. Initially, from 2014 through to 2018, we can attribute that largely to the disaster at SARS at the time. And then the decrease from 2020 all the way through is driven by what happened in COVID. The sales ban in COVID reduced legal consumption of cigarettes dramatically. And ever since, the illicit market in cigarettes has been very, very significant, resulting in a strong decrease in legal consumption. Everybody knows about the illicit market in cigarettes. We can see it reflected in the consumption of legal cigarettes, because legal cigarettes have dropped dramatically, by more than 50% over this 15-year period. At the same time, we see nothing of that sort in terms of alcohol consumption. So, in conclusion, we are not illicit trade deniers. We are not saying that there is no illicit alcohol. There is illicit alcohol. It needs to be addressed. However, what we do say is that the industry's claim of a 55% increase in illicit alcohol between 2017 and 2024 is firstly not supported by the research that it supposedly underlies it. And secondly, it's just not logical. How can there be such a huge increase in illicit alcohol if there is a substantial increase in both aggregate and per capita terms of legal alcohol? It just does not make sense. So, the lessons of tobacco are instructive. Take illicit trade seriously and implement measures like track and trace to prevent it. The good news is that in February, no, just after the new, no, it wasn't in February, it was just beyond that, in March or April, the new commissioner at SARS has indicated that he would like a track and trace system to be implemented for sensitive products, including tobacco and alcohol products. We think that that is a very, very useful and good way to go about things. The Euromonitor report indicated that they wanted to help government to understand the size of the problem, comparing it to 2017 and 2020, as well as to identify ways to combat this issue. Essentially what they're saying is, trust us, we are here to help you. And our evaluation of that report is it is a self-interest report. It creates an issue where there is none. And essentially what they're trying to do is they are trying to undermine National Treasury's plans to increase the excise tax on alcohol. That is the main aim of it. And by emphasizing illicit trade over and over again and putting it in the minds of the public, in the minds of policymakers, in the minds of the media, and emphasizing it, you are creating something that is a gross exaggeration of what it actually is. Let me just repeat myself at the end in terms of what do we mean by illicit trade. We are not talking about shebeens selling liquor that they bought at the wholesalers at full price, at full taxes, but do not have a license. What we are talking about illicit in this particular context is that the tax has not been paid. Our message is take illicit trade seriously, but do not take the industry's word for it. They are not a honest partner in this particular instance. We've written 3 reports and papers on this particular issue. This is going to be made available, or this presentation is going to be made available afterwards. Feel free to have a look at them. And yeah, there are different levels of complexity and of detail into which we go based on the evaluation that we've done of the Euromonitor report. If you want to contact me, those are my contact details. My colleague Mkhulisi is also available, and that is his contact details, as well as the website for REAP. Thank you very much, Chair. I'm sorry I went a bit over my time. Noms, I think that you are muted.
Sorry, I went a bit over my time.
Thank you very much, Professor Kone. There's a question for you here from Daily Maverick, and I will ask that you answer it before we open up questions in the room.
No, I think that you are muted. Sorry, I went.
Thank you very much, Professor Kone. There's a question for you here from Daily Maverick, and I will ask that you answer it before we open up questions in the room.
No, I think that you are muted.
The question is, there's a question for you here from David Maverick, and I will ask that you answer it.
I'm afraid I'm getting a very large amount of feedback over and over again.
Kone, can you
Yes.
hear me?
I'm hearing you now.
Okay.
I suspect there might be a delay.
Yes. So please read the question. It's in the chat box, in the Q&A box, and then please answer it. And then we'll take questions in the room.
Okay. Okay, thanks very much, Lindsay, for that particular question. So I think I would like to respond to that question by also referring to what Mpolo Khote said previously. There is always a tension between, on the one hand, let's say, increasing the production and the consumption of something, and the consequences of that in terms of employment. If our country is only interested in getting employment no matter what the consequences are, then we should be allowing so many things that have got very, very negative impacts on society as a whole. If it comes to something like tobacco and alcohol, of course there are people employed in that sector. In the alcohol sector, substantially more than in the tobacco sector. But at the same time, if those products are resulting in immense harms to the economy, you should be asking yourself the question, should we be encouraging these industries to increase their production so that more and more harm can be created? And that is the question that we would have to ask ourselves. As economists, there's always a trade-off. If we want, on the one hand, more jobs, it means more liquor, more social harms. On the other hand, if there's going to be a decrease in the social harms from alcohol and from tobacco, it's going to possibly mean that there's going to be fewer jobs that are going to be created over there. So I think it is disingenuous to say that we are able to achieve all these public health benefits and there not being any economic consequence. Of course there's going to be some economic consequence, but we have to look at it from a holistic point of view. If one has a look at what is the cost associated with alcohol use, a study that was conducted some years ago indicated that it's as high as 10 to 12% of GDP per year in total. That is a huge social cost. If at the same time we are going to encourage that industry to produce more and more of that harmful product, and we end up in a situation where we are having more of that social cost, I'm not sure if that's the direction that we want to go to. I hope that you got this response. It is very noisy in the background. I'm not sure if I got through clearly. Back to you, Nons.
Thank you very much, Professor Kone. We heard you loud and clear. There was absolutely no noise on our end. I'm going to open up for questions in the room if there's any. There are no questions. I think you did such an excellent job. Oh, there is actually one. Please.
What does the lady here did mention earlier? What does track and trace look like? What does that look like? He talked about tracking and tracing.
Kone, the question is, what does tracking and tracing
so there's a question
like?
regarding track and trace. I didn't get the full question, and my understanding from what I heard is, what does it look like? Yes. So let me talk about it in terms of tobacco. It's to some extent slightly more my comfort zone, but exactly the same principle applies to alcohol as well. So essentially what you do is on each and every packaging point, so in the case of tobacco, on a pack of cigarettes, not on a carton, on a pack of cigarettes, you have a tax stamp. On a bottle of spirits, you have a tax stamp. That tax stamp has got certain characteristics. They can be read by a scanner, and that scanner allows you to then track where that product is going to, and it also allows you to trace it back. Let me give you an example. If you get a parcel from DHL, they will often then say, the parcel is currently at this particular warehouse. It is being put onto the truck right now, and you can expect it to be delivered between 4 o'clock and 6 o'clock at night. That is what they call a tracking mechanism, where that parcel of yours, given a QR code or a barcode or some other way of identifying it, can see what is the route that it is likely or intended to take. Tracking, that is tracking. Tracing is, I have picked up this parcel, and now is it possible for me to see where did it come from? So when track and tracing systems are implemented, the idea is that any person, you and I, can go into the street, pick up a pack of cigarettes at the shop, and put in track the QR code, and we can see, this pack was delivered at the shop on the 20th of July. It was sent from this warehouse on that particular date. It was sent from the big warehouse of the BAT on this particular date, and it was manufactured on that particular date. That is what track and tracing allows you to do. What track and tracing does not do is it does not automatically tell you that there's a problem. You need to scan it. So behind track and trace, you need a system. And a system is going to tell you that if in a particular place there's suddenly a substantial amount of products that seem to be having problems, then the authorities should get involved, and they should then go and look at where are those problem areas and take a corrective action. What does corrective action require? Well, taking off anything from the shelf that does not have a legitimate track and trace code. Right. So this has been implemented, the system has been implemented in a number of countries, not just in European countries with high incomes and with highly sophisticated things. It's been implemented with significant success in Kenya. It was one of the leaders about 10 years ago to implement track and trace. It's been implemented in countries like Brazil, in countries like Turkey. These are all countries with which we can identify in terms of our own economic level, or our own level of economic development. So it can be done. It is not the silver bullet that's going to resolve all illicit trade, but it definitely is going to make a huge impact on illicit trade where it does appear. Let me just re-emphasize. For tobacco, and specifically for cigarettes, we have a major problem. If you go walking into the street and pick up a pack of cigarettes, it is with at least 50% likelihood going to be an illicit pack of cigarettes. We do not see that yet, and we hopefully will never see that for alcohol. And in fact, tobacco and alcohol products are so different. How do you make illicit beer? It's very hard to do. How do you make illicit wine? It's very hard to do. Making illicit spirits is relatively easy. So I'm not saying that illicit spirits do not exist, they do. And the research by the industry seems to indicate that most of the illicit alcohol is actually in the form of spirits rather than in the form of wine or of beer. I hope that that gives you a semi-decent answer.
Excellent. The answer is very excellent from what I hear here. Thank you very much. Actually, you've just schooled a whole lot of us here. Thank you very much, Kone. We're going to be going to Kashifa now quickly, and I'm going to cut your time to 10 minutes because I can do that as the moderator. Thank you very much. And we are going then to also have Professor Charles Perry, who's just joined us. But over to you, Kashifa.
Thank you very much, everybody, and good morning. It is still morning. I'm going to switch my camera off just because I don't like seeing my own face. And then I will share my slides in just a moment. Alrighty, assuming now that everybody can see my slides who's online. Good morning again. My name is Kashifa Ansa, and I am the project lead for the DG Murray Trust Rethink Your Drink campaign. We are an alcohol harms reduction campaign actively working to reduce alcohol harm in the country through a number of measures: policy advocacy, community work, commissioning research, and also strategic litigation. And when I was asked today to speak about alcohol harm, one of the things that always sits with me when I get asked that question is to emphasize the fact that alcohol is not an ordinary commodity, right? It's not bread, it's not milk, it's not cheese. When you consume alcohol, you consume it and it causes harm, or in some cases, just chills there. But bread, milk, cheese, meat, chicken, all of those things have continued positive impacts in society, right? If we make the price of bread accessible, the price of milk accessible, we know that making it more affordable will be of benefit to society. The same cannot be said for alcohol, because alcohol is not an ordinary commodity in the same way that our regular groceries are. So one of the things that DGMT and that the Rethink Your Drink campaign holds close to our heart is when we're designing these policies and we're sitting around the policy table with National Treasury or whoever other government department we're sitting around the table with, we need to ask ourselves, what is the impact of these things that DGMT and that the Rethink Your Drink campaign holds close to our heart is when we're designing these policies and we're sitting around the policy table with National Treasury or whoever other government department we're sitting around the table with, we need to ask ourselves, what is the impact of these that the campaign also for our heart? When we're designing these policies and we're sitting around the policy table with National Treasury or other government department we're sitting around the table with, we need to ask ourselves, what is the impact of these that the campaign also for our heart? When we're designing these policies and we're sitting around the policy table with National Treasury or other government department. Okay, so I'm unmuted, but if I turn my volume down, I can do that. Okay, can I have an indication that you can hear me? Just a thumbs up or something would help.
This is me. Look, I'm on my phone. Maybe I should turn off the other one and re-accept you. Send me another link because I'll send off.
So essentially what we're saying is when we're designing these policies, we need to look at what the impact for that would be on our children, right? We're trying to create a South Africa that will work, that will be safe, that will be healthy for our children. And so that our children themselves will be safe, will be happy, and will be able to thrive. But unfortunately, we're not living in that kind of reality. We're seeing major challenges as a result of excess heavy and binge drinking. I'll go into this a little bit later on, but we're not trying to reduce alcohol consumption in its entirety. We're not prohibitionists, not us, not SAPA, not REAP. What we are trying to do is reduce heavy and binge drinking because that's where the harm lies, right? That's where the 55% of trauma cases in our hospitals lies. That's where the fact that 1 in 11 children in South Africa are living with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. That's where 63.5% of the murders that occur between midnight and 4 a.m. as linked to alcohol consumption occur. That's where 60% of femicides are sitting. That's where 40% of rapes are sitting. It's in that harm curve. When you drink too much, that's where the harm occurs, right? And so we have a natural experiment with the COVID-19 pandemic. As Professor Van Velbeek spoke about earlier, there was a reduced consumption during the pandemic as a result of alcohol bans. During the complete ban, we saw a 63% reduction in femicide, and during some minimal restrictions, we saw a 43% reduction in femicide. So when we're looking at our country we've classified gender-based violence as a national disaster, what we also need to be looking at is these statistics, that there is a very clear policy solution to help reduce gender-based violence and femicide in the country. It's not a silver bullet. We're not saying that when we address alcohol, when excise taxes increases, when we ban advertising, when we ban all of the other, when we do all of the other restrictions that we're talking about, that gender-based violence will be absolved. No, because there are of course other factors that contribute to gender-based violence and femicide in our country. But those numbers are too large for us to ignore. And so another number that is too large for us to ignore is where we're seeing alcohol harm occur the most. Alcohol harm exacerbates inequality, and people in lower income communities are the ones carrying the burden. They are 4.5 times more likely to die from an alcohol-related cause than people living in wealthier areas. Yet, some of the policy contention that we have is actually protecting people in those higher income areas when they are not necessarily the ones who need protection. It's people in the lower income areas who are not able to access the health care that they need if they struggle with cancer, if they struggle with liver cirrhosis, all of these other harms that come with excess consumption. And here's the harm curve that I was speaking about earlier. We know that from the data that's been presented and that's been researched, we know that moderate consumption is what is going to be positive for our economy. Moderate consumption, right? We're talking low to moderate consumption, so, between 1 and 3 drinks, right? But heavy consumption, that's where the challenge lies. Heavy and big Monday, people skipping work on a Friday because of Puza Thursday. And that is costing our fiscus a lot of money. Tourism is then deterred by crime. A lot of people, especially in the Western Cape, where Adila and I live, say, oh, but this will have a major impact on tourism. Having a major impact on tourism at the moment is crime. Crime in our country is at an all-time high, and we need to make sure, that it's reduced aggregately, but there are major pockets of crimes in our country that need to be reduced. Those types of things are what can increase our tourism in the country. Gordon also spoke about this earlier as well, the 10 to 12% cost of our GDP. People often put this out there as the first argument to argue against some of the measures that we're advocating for, right? To say that the industry contributes jobs, it contributes to our GDP, and it absolutely does. But they contribute about 3 to 6% of our GDP. It's a lot. But in compared to how much we are having to cover for the amount of harm, road accidents, health, injury, murder, loss of productivity, you're looking at 10 to 12%. Today, that's around 800 billion rand a year. We are subsidizing industry profit with our taxes, and that shouldn't be the case. We shouldn't be doing that, right? 800 billion rand can do a lot in our grant system. It can do a lot for housing. It can do a lot for infrastructure, right? And yes, there is going to be a loss, as Gurune said, in jobs, maybe in revenue for industry. But if we look at the gains that we'll have a lot more gains. If I do not buy a bottle of beer, what else can I buy for my family? If you think of the challenge that we have at the start of every school year, children starting school without stationery, without uniform, but parents had money in December. So if parents are spending less money in December on alcohol and things like that, they are able to have more money, and kids can start school on the right footing every year. So those are the kinds of gains that we're talking about. Just because we're not spending it on alcohol doesn't mean that money is being flushed down the drain. It's going elsewhere and likely going to places that will have a longer term benefit as opposed to a longer term harm. I'm almost done. I've added this slide in here again because we need to ask the question, who are we benefiting when we ignore the policy measures we're trying to push? It is not lower income groups. When we hear things like, oh, alcohol is the key to the township economy. Is it really? Right? With a big industry push to go into townships, legalize more taverns in townships. The fact that alcohol is oversupplied to townships in itself is a problem, let alone the fact that a lot of them are illicit. Right? So we need to look at what our communities look like, what our communities need. Do they need more taverns or more libraries? Do they need more taverns or more places of recreation for young people? And that's the kind of balance that we need to play here. And that is why we are pushing for the policy recommendations that we're pushing for, because then what we're going to be seeing is that there'll be more benefit in our communities than harm. And I wanted to look at the next slide here, looking at where the harm really sits, right? Because we've been, I think, educated to a certain degree about the illicit trade, but it's created a lot of fear in everyday South Africans. From the economic perspective where we're sitting, yes, there's concern about the illicit trade. Will it cost the economy? Are we going to be losing tax revenue from it? Yes. But we also need to be looking at currently with the data, the numbers that we do have, how much harm is illicit alcohol actually contributing? So if we take, and we shouldn't, but if we take the Euromonitor numbers, right, which states that 20% of our current market or 1/5 of our current market is illicit and 4/5 or 80% is illicit alcohol, if we take those numbers at face value and look at the harm that we're getting, still, majority of the harm is coming from illicit alcohol. 80% of the harm, therefore, is coming from illicit alcohol. So we cannot say, well, excise taxes are on the table, illicit trade is going to increase, so let's sit on our hands to make sure illicit trade doesn't increase and us as industry can keep our prices low. No, 80% of harm is still sitting in your product. Therefore, we have to deal with your product to deal with that harm, and gives us capacity, gives SARS, etc., all of those other government departments, the capacity financially and otherwise to deal with illicit trade as an independent issue. I'm almost done, Nomtebo. And so on this last slide here, basically what we need to understand that illicit markets exist everywhere, not only with alcohol, not only with tobacco, but clothing, food, all of it. Illicit markets, it is criminality and it's going to exist. But we have to understand that the policies that we're pushing for, especially alcohol pricing policies, still reduce consumption and therefore reduce harm. So some of the policy measures, and we share some of them with SAPA as well, because we also follow the World Health Organization safer strategies, is firstly to reduce cheap alcohol. Our communities are overwhelmed by cheap alcohol. And for a lot of us sitting in this room, in the locations we live in, don't see cheap alcohol, right? For you, alcohol and bread, not really a gamble. But for somebody living in a lower income area, alcohol and bread, very much a gamble, right? We're looking at regulating online sales. At the moment, we don't have strong enough regulations on online sales. A 17-year-old child can order a couple of groceries with their Woolies order and order alcohol and get that delivery, and the driver won't check their age. We won't know who's consuming that alcohol, right? We also need to track alcohol. We've spoken about track and trace as well, and reduce late night availability. I spoke earlier about the aggregate crimes that happen between midnight and 4 a.m. That is a major, major challenge. So closing closing establishments at midnight between midnight and 2 a.m. is going to be a major, major win for us to reduce especially violent crime in our communities. And then lastly, we need to be protecting children. It says on this slide, restrict advertising, but we need to go further and completely ban advertising except at point of sale. There is no reason we need to be excessively encouraging anybody, young people, women especially, to be consuming excessive amounts of alcohol. Taglines like "drink responsibly," not for sales for persons under the age of 18, are simply taglines. They don't deter people from actually doing the behavior. So yeah, I think I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Let me just stop sharing here.
I hope there's no questions online that we're missing. Okay. Questions in the room?
Glad you gave her constraint.
Yes, I know her. Yes, it's a comment.
Sandy, Ish, are we able to hear her with that mic?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. Super. Thanks very much for that presentation. So basically, how do we get the balance right in terms of, you say no advertising whatsoever, but at the same time, as my colleague was saying, you know, there's a whole issue of the balance of ensuring that existing industries exist so that people remain employed and so on and so forth, whilst we're also seeking to reduce the harm. I think it's a very tricky one. So what would your response be to that?
I mean, I think when I say no advertising, it is banning advertising like outside of a liquor shop, right? And then, so that we know that people going into a liquor shop are the ones who are of age, legally able to buy it, and would then be enticed by those ads to buy whatever product or however much that product they choose to do so, depending on their financial capacity. But what the problem with alcohol advertising is at the moment is that it is unchecked, right? It's self-regulated, and that is a major, major issue. So I just came from the airport this morning, and the airport is covered. Woo! The airport is covered with alcohol advertising. So if I think of somebody coming from wherever they are coming from in the world, that is the first impression they're getting of our country, right? 21-year-olds coming from the US, coming from wherever there's an age restriction to drink at 21 years old, coming to South Africa, celebrating the fact that they can consume heavy amounts of alcohol because here the age restriction is 18. And you walk out of the airport and there are all these pretty people jumping off the beach. You know what I mean? You're not going to be able to reconcile the fact that alcohol harms you if all you're seeing is positivity. I mean, I bring up the issue around women and alcohol consumption. Generally and historically, Black women did not consume as much as men. That number has shifted. Black women are increasingly drinking more alcohol because of advertising. Because now alcohol is associated with women empowerment, mommy wellness, all of these other things. And we're seeing family structures being further broken down because not only is a father consuming excess amounts of alcohol, but so is a mum, right? A mum who can fall pregnant. And we have the highest FASD rates in the world. So we hear the economic arguments, absolutely. But I don't think banning advertising is going to have a major impact on industry revenue because there are other ways that they can get people to buy their products. People who drink are going to be able to choose to do so completely of their own volition, go into a store, choose a product based on what they see, as opposed to being heavily influenced by advertising. And it's everywhere, outside of school, on our phones. So social media is unchecked at the moment. There was an issue a few weeks ago about an influencer working with a particular alcohol company advertising the drinks there. And it's just not being measured. I mean, 26 cans you needed to collect to win 1 million rand. The cans were 500 mils. I think that's 1.5 units of alcohol. Are you saying that I, as one person, need to consume that much alcohol to stand a chance to win 1 million rand? That is an advertising restriction that needs to be pulled. It needs to be dealt with. You know what I mean? So the economic argument for me, at least with advertising, I don't think revenue or job losses, revenue will be a major loss. Of course, marketing industries and so on will struggle. But people are creative. I'm a creative myself. People are creative. We can make it work. We just have to be willing to try, right?
One last question.
Yes. So just, I think that what Kashi was talking to is the issue around normalizing. What advertising does, it normalizes alcohol in our society. And that's what children are being exposed to. But there was also a study done in 2017 by Genesis Analytics that actually talks about this issue around loss of revenue. And it's estimated that less than 400 million will be lost if we banned and restricted advertising. The job loss will be less than 1,600 people if we took the measure to increase restrictions around advertising. But part of what it is, when Pick n Pay advertises, so snuck into the pamphlet next to the cheese and the bread is 3 for the price of 2. Or you see this thing of 6-pack, Black Friday. Those are the things that we need to address so that people begin to think about alcohol differently. Sports. We should not be having Castle sponsoring rugby or soccer or any of the sports that we are wanting young people and children to take up as a positive release of energy and developing positive lifestyles. So the issue around advertising is a real problem. At the moment, if you got a problem with how Spa advertises liquor, right? You have to write to the advertising regulatory board to say this is a problem. There's no vetting beforehand. So the ad gets to stay on before you object. Then they've got a process of investigating that allows the ad to be there, a shelf life, for another 2-3 weeks before they make a ruling. So the issue around relooking how we advertise alcohol in the country is a major issue. It should be a statutory issue. It should not be left up to the Alcohol Regulatory Board that is funded by the industry to regulate.
And fundamentally also, what I've seen in verdicts previously, the problem also is that if you're not a member of the AIB,
you don't have
that
to
verdict is
the
not
rules.
even binding on you.
Yeah.
So it's,
you don't have to comply with the rules. So there was one with an energy drink where in the ad, the young person says, oh, it's cool to drink and drive, not alcohol, but the energy drink. Somebody complained about it, and because that energy drink company was not a part of that group, they didn't need to do anything about that.
Thank you very much, everyone. We are going to move on very, very quickly. There's another, it's getting quite exciting in the room. Prof. Perry, please just bear with us. Mr. Lehota wants to make one tiny little comment, and then we will move over to you and your slides. You can start sharing your slides if you can hear me. I hope you can hear me.
I can hear you, but I've
Yeah,
said share the slides. I'm not sure you can see them.
What you indicated earlier, basically there's no loss to in terms of resources. In economics, you have resource allocation. That if money is not spent on something, it's spent on something else. So the issue around that, when you ban advertising, there's going to be job losses and all of that. That money gets redirected elsewhere. I mean, if you remember, there was around the banning of tobacco advertising. There was that there's going to be problems around the sports and all is going to collapse and all of the kind of like that. But what it did is it just sort of like gave other stakeholders an opportunity to play in that space. So basically it's the issue around there's going to be job losses and all of that. Yes, there might be sort of a redirection in terms of from one sector to another, but there's no loss of resources to the economy as a whole, but just a reallocation of where the resources are going. And I think that's quite an important issue to think about, that nothing goes down the drain. There's just kind of like reallocation. And I think as society, we need to be mindful about where do we want to reallocate resources. But we want to reallocate resources to something that is sustainable, beneficial to our community in terms of developing the country that we want. So this fear-mongering around job losses and all of that, I think is just a mistake. Yeah, that's what I want to say.
Thank you very much. Prof. Perry, can I hand over to you, please? You please unmute yourself.
Okay, I think I am unmuted.
Okay, great. We can hear you loud and clear. Please go ahead.
Great. And can you see the slides?
We are seeing your face for now, but maybe we'll see the slides. Oh, okay. We don't see your face, but we still don't see your slides.
Okay, I'm sharing now.
Okay, now we can see your slides. If you can put it on presentation mode. Is it on presentation mode?
As far as I know, it is, yes.
Okay, you can go right ahead.
Great.
Yeah. Great, we can see it now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't have too many slides, about 9 or 10, and some of the material's been covered. So I think we can deal with this quite quickly. So the title of my presentation is The Truth About the Illicit Alcohol Trade, What We Know, What We Do Not Know, and What It Means for Alcohol Tax Policy. I'm a Chief Specialist Scientist at the Mental Health, Alcohol, Substance Use and Tobacco Research Unit at the South African Medical Research Council, which until a couple of years ago, I was the director. And the point I'm going to make through this presentation is that, as others have said, the illicit trade is real. It's uncertain in scale. I think Prof. van Waalbeek made that very clear, but it is manageable with enforcement. And I'll say a little bit more about that than others. Okay, changing the slide. Let's see if that does it. How do I change the slide here? Okay. So what I'm going to cover is what counts as illicit alcohol. Again, repetition, so I can do that quite quickly. Mention that its size is uncertain, that industry estimates should be treated cautiously. I feel as though Prof. Cornet and I have collaborated here, but I can go through that again quite quickly. I'm going to talk a bit about beer appearing as less vulnerable than spirits to the illicit trade. So that's something that perhaps hasn't been said enough. The illicit trade is manageable, and then some concluding thoughts. So I seem to have trouble with going forward. So what counts as illicit alcohol, and how does that differ from unrecorded alcohol? Unrecorded alcohol basically is the larger category. It's unrecorded because we don't have all of the information about it, but it may or may not be illicit. Illicit alcohol is a subcategory of unrecorded alcohol, and sometimes people get the two confused. They're talking about unrecorded, where perhaps it might be someone making home brews for own consumption. That is not illicit. It only becomes illicit if it's sold. So the main policy concern is on the right-hand side, is the commercial scale illegal production, smuggling or counterfeit products, put into the same bottles or containers, and tax evasion. So I'm going to talk briefly about three kinds of alcohol. There's firstly surrogate alcohol, which really isn't, I don't believe it's an issue in South Africa. That's alcohol that may be part of medicines or perfumes. And, the point being there that people don't need to drink alcohol really from medicine to any great extent. Cough medicine, you can get alcohol easily in South Africa. It's available, it's cheap. And so substitution with surrogate alcohol is really not going to be an issue. And that can be illegal, obviously, if it's sold on a commercial scale. But really, I think we can keep that out of the picture. Then we have homemade alcohol. You could make it at home yourself. People made it during COVID with pineapples. That wasn't illegal. You can make homemade beer, but it becomes illegal if you start selling it in any great way. Generally, we've done research on this, and we asked people about, do you drink homemade brews and things like that? And in our surveys, it doesn't come up with a very high percentage of people. Limited appeal. It's not sort of socially desirable, really. The people who are drinking it tend to be very, very poor or very old. It's not aspirational. You'd rather drink a beer from a commercial producer than homemade beer. And it generally doesn't last very long. So again, it's also it can be bulky, so you're not going to move it around to any great extent. The area we're talking about really today is commercial smuggling, which comes, perhaps alcohol can be smuggled over the borders. Counterfeiting, where maybe you're buying a Gordon's gin, but actually inside it's something else that's made not commercially, it's cheaper, basically it's sold in a way that avoids taxation. Or there's excise tax evasion, where people take alcohol out of the country for export because it's not subject to excise taxes. Then it's brought back in another harbor or secretly, so it avoids the excise taxes. Or perhaps, again, with something we haven't heard much about in South Africa, where legal producers make some of the alcohol and they ship some of it out the back door to avoid excise taxes. That hasn't been seen in any great extent. With commercial scale production and illicit sales, the real issue is around spirits, because it's a moderate risk, shall we say. For the illicit trade in spirits, it can be quite economically viable, and it's easier to move around than, for example, beer and wine. Beer is much more difficult to smuggle across borders because it's then spirits. You can have quite a big amount of spirits in one bottle, where you have to take probably 6 bottles or so to be equivalent to 1 bottle of spirits. So it's more bulky, it's lower value per liter, and there's little widespread evidence of the illicit trade in wine, and especially in beer. So it's spirits that's the issue, if it's an issue at all. Okay, now move. Next slide. Okay, sorry. There we go. How certain are estimates of illicit alcohol? I think Prof. van Walbeek has covered that very, very clearly. So I'm just going to give some of the headline points here. Illicit alcohol is by definition illicit. It's hidden. It's illicit and it's hidden. So that obviously makes it much harder to estimate. It's the same when you look at illicit drug use. It's a hidden problem. Estimates, as he's shown, depend heavily on the methods, also sometimes on the assumptions behind them and the data quality. So I think that's covered really there in the top 2 colored rectangles. And he also made it very clear that industry-funded estimates should be treated cautiously and independently scrutinized. And in fact, there is an incentive for industry to exaggerate the extent of the illicit trade. And I've been kind of looking at this for years and years, and I've always felt that the industry estimates are way more than we're recording from any surveys that we pick up, and we haven't done any large-scale surveys of the illicit trade. So the key messages to take away are, as has been said, is illicit alcohol does exist. It's not non-existent, but claims about size and growth must be interpreted with caution. Prof. van Walbeek clearly commented on the issue of growth, where the industry is saying very much that the growth is exponential, and certainly the data doesn't suggest that. When you look at the revenue data from Treasury revenue data, and this uncertainty about the illicit trade is not the same as proof of a large illicit market. So that's the main point to hold there. Next slide. Beer. I think we need to focus on beer in the discussion. And I'm repeating kind of what I've said before, but I think it deserves attention because beer is the product most consumed in South Africa. More than 50% of the volume of beverage is consumed through beer, and also the absolute alcohol. So beer is what most people are drinking. They are drinking wine and ready-to-made drinks and spirits, but beer is the big issue, and that's certainly our own research. The second bullet work that I did looked at heavy drinking, and beer stood out as the product that's most heavily consumed, and heavy drinking has been linked most to harm from alcohol. So we need to focus attention on beer when we're looking at the illicit trade, and tax reform can encourage lower strength products and reduce consumption. We know that, but as I've said before, lower value per litre makes smuggling less attractive. It's bigger, it's more bulky than spirits. It's harder to counterfeit profitably. Fermented beer is less attractive than high-valued spirits, and you can't produce a castle lager through counterfeit means that's going to come out tasting the same. And there's little evidence of widespread illicit beer consumption or sales. So what are people going to do if beer prices increase through minimum unit pricing or through excise tax increases? They'll either drink less, they may switch to lower strength beer, move from like 5.5% alcohol to 4.5%, or they will reduce spending elsewhere and continue to spend as much as they do on beer. But it's not the most plausible source for illicit substitution. So let's look at some of the health effects of increasing alcohol excise taxes. The point here, and this was made by the last speaker, is we need to keep risk in perspective. What is the risk if excise taxes increase? Well, there could be an increase in illicit or unrecorded alcohol use, but I'll talk more soon about the experiences of Russia and Lithuania, and they don't support this. It's possible that people will get exposed to poorer quality alcohol. Maybe they would move from malt beer, SAB produced beer, to home brews, but that's unlikely for the reasons I've given above. And some of those home brews are obviously less healthy. They're not industrially manufactured. There could be methanol contamination. In a small number of cases, during COVID, we probably had, and I was monitoring, less than 20 cases of methanol poisoning, and they got a lot of publicity. So we probably captured most of those cases that occurred. The risk obviously needs to be monitored and managed, but I think we need to balance that with the likely larger benefit from increasing alcohol excise taxes. Some of the modeling work done by REAP at the University of Cape Town, which hasn't been shared today, has been reduced heavy drinking will come about as a result of increased excise taxes. And as a result of reduced heavy drinking and less drinking per capita in general, not just amongst heavy drinkers, we will see fewer injuries, assaults, road crashes. There'll be less burden on health services from TB, HIV, cardiovascular disease, alcohol-related cancers, and obviously we'll have lower social and economic costs. So that's got to be weighed about the possible increases in problems from illicit alcohol use. And I think Kansifa made that very clearly. So the greatest health risk in South Africa remains from excessive ethanol consumption, not the illicit alcohol itself. And as Corne has shown very clearly, unlike the case with tobacco, revenue data from alcohol shows an increase in recent years, discounting the view that the illicit trade is increasing rapidly. I'm covering this quite simplistically because he covered it in detail. So the illicit trade is a reality, but it's a manageable policy risk. So I'm going to talk about how do we manage it, and this is largely a government responsibility. And certainly, when we look at increasing excise taxes, the managing that is not only the responsibility of national treasury, it's also largely a responsibility of border management, border control, and the South African police services, community, and so forth. So concerns about the illicit trade should trigger stronger implementation and implementation of existing regulations, but not become a reason to avoid evidence-based alcohol tax reform. The industries get a hold up the view that the illicit trade fear of this should be the reason the government doesn't do anything about looking at implementing excise tax increases. And that would be a huge mistake. So what can we do to address problems around customs, around smuggling, and around excise tax evasion? Government needs to strengthen inspections at borders and also at outlets to make sure that taxes have been paid. They need to do compliance checks. If alcohol is being sold below the excise tax burden, the excise tax rate, clearly it's an illicit product and you need to take it off the shelves. It needs to be using intelligence services, data sharing across SARS, the National Consumer Council, border and customs agencies. We need to increase border capacity and scanning to check that there's no smuggling across borders of alcohol, particularly spirits. Risk profiling and so forth. We've talked a lot about tracking and tracing, which now can even use cell phones to do the scanning at points of sale and all along the distribution chain. The enforcement needs to target large-scale operations where there's industrial production of counterfeit products and tax leakage. And they also needs to go the full way, need to involve the Justice Department to make sure there's proper prosecution so that the cases that are where there's law enforcement picks up cases, they need to be taken through to the courts and prosecuted. So the policy logic here is, yes, we raise excise taxes, we monitor illicit activity, we strengthen enforcement and prosecution, and that will lead to a protection of revenue and also health. Sorry, one more slide before this one. Okay, oopsie. Okay, international experience, which we haven't really covered to a great degree today, and I'm not going to say too much about it. But let's look at 3 countries. The international experience basically is that tax increases on alcohol do not inevitably lead to more illicit alcohol. If we look at the example, and I'm going to give you, my last slide is the references, you can look these up yourself, of Lithuania, which not that long ago implemented higher alcohol excise taxes. What did they find? They found improved health and revenue gains and no reported surge in illegal alcohol. Russia, this is a little bit earlier, in the early 2000s, implemented tax increases, both minimum unit pricing and excise tax increases, and a number of alcohol control measures, such as were mentioned by Chifa. The track and trace system, they implemented restrictions on physical availability, the time alcohol can be sold, restrictions on drinking in public places, and marketing and advertising restrictions. So it was a basket of measures, not just revenue measures. They found that alcohol consumption declined and deaths declined, and it had a dramatic effect on increasing life expectancy. Closer to home in Kenya, they implemented a strategy of excise tax stamps together with enforcement and this led to measures to control counterfeit alcohol, and they found better verification and compliance. So some will say that South Africa is different to these countries, but these countries also have, like South Africa, economic stress, an illicit market, and a bench drinking culture. So I think we can use them as examples. And the key message here is that not so that South Africa is 100% identical to these countries, but that the illicit trade can be managed when tax reform is paired with enforcement. So if you're going to increase taxes next year at the budget speech, it can't be done without planning for proper enforcement and bringing in these other agencies. So my last slide, in conclusion, basically to repeat what I've said, is that alcohol tax policy should focus on reducing ethanol consumption, regardless of where it comes from, and alcohol-related harm. And it shouldn't be dominated by exaggerated fears of illicit trade. There can be discussion of it, but it can't be dominated. The industry is going to put this out as the big issue. It's not the big issue. Illicit trade is a policy risk to manage. It's not a reason to avoid effective alcohol policy implementation. We need to be honest about the uncertainty of the size of the illicit trade. We need to keep the illicit trade in perspective and prioritize enforcement, as I've said. Beer is really the big issue to look at in the room. And from all accounts, beer is not likely to be affected greatly by illicit trade. And the evidence from international research is encouraging that you can increase taxes, you can increase you can implement minimum unit pricing, and that they don't inevitably fuel the illicit trade. The final question to leave with you is not that whether the illicit trade exists. The question is whether concerns about the illicit trade should prevent evidence-based efforts to reduce alcohol-related harm, including increasing excise taxes and implementing minimum unit pricing. And I strongly believe that the answer to that question is no. The illicit trade shouldn't prevent this. And that's the references that you can pick up. These slides will be shared. You can go to those links and see these studies done in Kenya, in Russia, in Lithuania, and the beer study, the heavy drinking study that I was involved in. Those three references are there.
Or is it us?
It's me. That's my hotspot.
So I think we'd like to do one-on-one
With him, okay. That's fine. Prof. Perry, can you hear me?
I can, yes.
Professor Charles, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay, great. There are no questions there are no questions for you. And I think you are so succinct that there's nothing. And thank you very much for taking the time to come through. We have reached the end of our media roundtable, and there are no questions that we're seeing online. But we shall ask that if any of the journalists that are connected online would like to ask something, we remain available as SAFA to answer those questions, and any of the presenters today can also answer questions offline of this platform. But thank you very much for joining us, and we shall be seeing you next time on the 27th of August, 2026. National Treasury will have a public consultation. You can go on the SAPA True Cost of Alcohol website to get a link to join that, should you be interested in joining and listening in. And I believe that there's still an opportunity for you to put through a request to present, should you want to present and speak on the matter. But that would be directly to Mr. Lekgote at National Treasury. You can get more information on that as well, should you need it, via the True Cost of Alcohol website. Thank you very much, everyone, and all the best. Have a good day.
Thank you.